All right, welcome into another Whiskey Zoom. I'm Carmen DeFalco, and we got a hell of a crew here today as we're going to talk about the release of Whiskey Acres Bottled in Bond, which is going to be hitting stores, including Binny's, very soon. We're going to give you all the details. So we've got Nick Nagele, my man from Whiskey Acres. So Nick and I did a Whiskey Zoom. I don't know whether that was probably back in April or May, right, Nick? I feel like.
1918, it feels like.
Yeah, well, with your beard, it definitely looked like 1918 back then. We've got Brett Pontoni, my good friend from Binny's, and Pat Brophy, another awesome dude from Binny's. These guys are whiskey aficionados. They make me look silly, and I think I know a thing or two, but they really have the knowledge. Nick, of course, is a whiskey maker from Whiskey Acres out in DeKalb. And yeah, so we're going to talk about Bottled in Bond, hitting Binny's coming up here soon. And we should probably just start with what is Bottled in Bond. And like Nick, when we chatted previously, we kind of touched on it a little, but I'll let you kind of, and you know, Brett and Pat, feel free to jump in too. You guys just kind of explain the premise behind Bottled in Bond, because I think people hear that, they're not sure what it means, but you know, it's basically like the first Consumer Protection Act that the government, right, one of the earliest that the government ever came up with in the late 19th century, right?
Technically it would be considered the first food law. It came with a number of other things in the bottle then, but it was the first food safety law. And at the time it was done to regulate, it was 1897, I believe the Bottled in Bond Act was passed.
1897.
And it was an act that was passed to basically clean up what people were bottling and selling to consumers as bourbon, as rye, as any kind of American whiskey. And what it did was essentially forced whiskey producers to remove everything from what they were selling to consumers that wasn't whiskey.
So,
basically.
So Nick, tell us about, you know, the idea of doing Bottled in Bond, because this goes back to like your first harvest, right? When you guys launched the distillery, and you've got to wait 4 years, you know, that's one of the minimum requirements. So you guys rolled this, like you had this in mind with that first harvest, right?
That's right. You know, so this is every bit of almost a 7-year project for us. You know, we started building the distillery and concepts in 2013, and then planted the seeds literally in 2014 and harvested them and began distilling immediately that fall. And it was shortly after that we met Brett and the team at Binny's. And quite honestly, one of the reasons we did this was a little bit of a challenge that Brett gave us, was to let it go, you know, to have the time, the courage, the patience to not just be a craft distillery, but be a craft distillery that can produce something that can compete with the quality and the patience that the big boys have. And so we're proud that we've done that.
I've always wondered, like, when you see Bottled in Bond, it's a government bonded warehouse. Like, does the government come knocking on the door and be like, we're here to check that you're officially a government bonded warehouse? Like, are they actually mindful? Are they monitoring that?
They can, and they do.
Really?
Yeah. So as a distiller, we have everything that we have that's aging is in what's bond. And so it is a bonded warehouse. So if something happens to it, the tax liability, that's the big thing here. The tax liability is covered. And so there's not somebody who comes around every day, but we have to report basically every pound of alcohol that's in barrels, and then account for it when it comes out of bond, so to speak. And they can audit us, and they have audited us. And thank God I don't manage the books.
No kidding. Nobody wants that job. Pat, let me ask you this. And by the way, Pat is we'll just say it's an undisclosed location.
It's a tasting cabinet. Nothing more, nothing less.
That's a tasty cabinet, all right. Like, Nick's got the beautiful scenery behind him. Brett's got some sort of agave plant behind him, I think. And
at peak reproductive cycle, by the way.
That's right. That is a quiote, so that is the heart. That is how agave sexually reproduce.
Is that right? Or the plant is at peak reproductive cycle?
There's things spicy on a Wednesday afternoon.
There's baby making going on behind me.
There's like some afternoon delight, getting ready for tequila at some point down the line. I like it. But Pat, let me ask you this. You know, so Pat's part of the Whiskey Hotline crew with Brett and Joe at Binny's, and like you guys get inundated with, because bourbon and rye is just blown up, and so you get inundated with calls, requests, and like when so bottled and bond is like a consumer protection act. And as whiskey's gotten more popular, it's almost like one of those buzzwords that has sort of gotten people frothy, hasn't it? Like people are looking for specialty things like this.
It's kind of become that kind of measuring stick for small producers to kind of announce their arrival. Like we have made it. We've lasted the years. We're bottling, legit casks, because only, really full-size barrels are ever going to last that long without them evaporating out or turning over woody or something like that. When a small producer is making a bottled and bond whiskey, they've been doing it right for a long enough time that I think it's kind of their announcement, their real arrival to be, considered on the same playing field as any of the big ones.
Or when these craft distillers approach you, like, what are you looking for to know? I mean, your palates are good, but like, how do you know, hey, this is a good, successful product we have on our hands here?
So we sort of triangulated people along those ways, along what Nick said, because a lot of what early craft distillery practices in terms of aging the product, making the product, aging the product, was a lot of people were strapped for cash and had to turn things around quickly. So there was a phenomenon early on of people aging in small and 5-gallon, 10-gallon, 15-gallon barrels. And it turns out that the product that was coming out of those barrels wasn't necessarily all that great. You could turn things around more quickly, but you missed a key piece of aging, which is people think of aging as you put it in wood, and the wood gives all this stuff to the whiskey, and then it makes it taste good. And that's only partially true, because there's additive aging and subtractive aging. So when something goes into the wood early on, everything comes out of the wood into the whiskey. Over the course of time, as it sits in the wood for a longer period of time, some really heavy, not necessarily great things that are very volatile start to oxidize out and start to evaporate out as the headspace develops in the barrel. As there's less liquid, more air, some of those bad elements go away, and then you really do start to focus on the good things in the wood, the vanillins, the tannins, the round, the lactones, all the body, and things like that. And so what we're looking for is something that has been aged correctly, where some of the volatiles that come early on in the aging process have started to go away. And the bottled and bond, if what we're finding by tasting numerous bourbons all over the place, once you get to 4 years old, that is a good age to really start looking at a bourbon.
Yeah.
That wood regimen on that kind of wood regimen that a distiller takes is an easy sign for us as whether or not they're to be taken seriously and their product is to be taken seriously multiple years from now. If we meet with a distiller who's putting stuff out in small barrels or is using some kind of scientific process to accelerate aging or something with that's someone who's looking to move cases of brown liquid. They're not there to produce the best whiskey they can. And so when you meet guys like Nick and his partners at Whiskey Acres, like, these guys are passionate about the raw material, and they built the right method to process it. You go and visit their distillery, which I highly recommend. They have trained people with the right equipment. They're filling large barrels now. I mean, they're just doing everything right. And it's kind of, I don't know if it's one of those things where when you see it, especially when you've seen, the opposite end of the spectrum as many times as Brett.
I know that. Nick, do you feel like you've gotten to the point now doing this all these years where, I mean, I don't know how much of an aficionado you were before all this. I know we've joked like, hey, you liked whiskey and you knew how to grow the grain. So, hey, let's open up a whiskey distillery. But like, is your palate at a different level now? Has it become so refined that you can start tasting and okay, this is honey barrel right here. Like, we hit the jackpot on this.
It is improved, but nobody on our team would ever call me the palate of the team. So we've referred to my partner. So, Jim is we'll call him the senior partner on the team, who's been farming for 52 years. So in his world, when he comes across good grain, he knows that right now. His son, Jamie, our other partner, has been farming with him for 20 plus years. He does come from a wine background. He does have a very good palate. And our head distiller, Rob, who's been with us for just shy of 5 years now, he's the lead dog in terms of going to sniff out honey barrels. And we've got another distiller who comes and runs the operation while we send Rob hunting, so to speak. And Rob comes back with things, and we sort of have an unwritten policy of don't tell us what we're tasting. And I don't want to know any context. I don't want to know the product. I don't want to know the age. I don't want the barrel size. That way, that when we're tasting it, we're not influenced by anything but what we're experiencing. And I think that's really important for the decisions that we ultimately make of what goes into a bottle. And having a diverse team to do this, I think is one of the things that sets us apart from the rest. And so once, Jim grows the corn and Jamie does some blending and Rob identifies the barrels, I'm the pretty face that comes and talks to you guys.
Just give everybody an idea of what you guys think of the bottled and bond. Nick was nice enough back, and this was supposed to come out in the spring, and then COVID hit. And that's kind of what Nick and I discussed in our last Zoom meeting. Whiskey Acres for weeks went into full-on helping the government with producing hand sanitizer at the start of all this. I think April was the original release date for Bottled and Bond. And at some point in February, March, Nick sent me a sample, and York and I tasted it, and we really enjoyed it. I'd like you guys to just talk about what you thought when you tasted it and what people can expect when they get it.
I really liked it when I got that first kind of initial sample from Nick back in, February, March, whatever. We were going to kind of give it a sneak preview at the big Binny's whiskey event that we obviously had to postpone. I liked it a lot. I like it more now. I just got a sample bottle. They were bottling it, yesterday, Nick?
Yep.
And Rob actually lives kind of out by me. I live not far from the distillery, actually, and Rob dropped off a sample bottle for me yesterday, and I think it's wonderful. And it's the first thing that really struck me with this is you can tell the age and the proof because it's all in the mouthfeel. And it is the thickest and richest in flavor and texture that I've had from a Whiskey Acres whiskey. And it wears its age on its sleeve, it wears its proof on its sleeve, but it's not overly hot or anything. You can just tell it hasn't been that watered down or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's just a notably mature whiskey.
And Nick said it right. There's the one thing about tasting through, the DNA is there, regardless of whether the aging regimen and things have changed. The DNA is there, and you really can't miss the DNA. And for me, again, it's the age, the added maturity. There's just the texture is probably the biggest thing. And people need to understand, or what we always talk about with wheat, there's some argument that wheat's main job is to give mouthfeel and structure and otherwise kind of stay out of the way of the corn. Because if you wheat in isolation isn't a horribly flavorful grain, you get some aroma, you don't get a lot of, and the flavors you do get are really, really soft and really, really subtle. They're more feel. So for me, following what Nick said, you can't miss the corn and the richness, the sweet flavors. You can, there's some fruit character that's there. Yeah. There's that caramel toffee character that's there that's just rich and round, plus a nice little bit of layer of spice.
So what's the timeline on this, guys? You want to walk everybody through that about when people can start to see the Whiskey Acres Bottled and Bond? So remember, it's 4 years, 100 proof, when they can start seeing it on the shelf at Binny's.
So Nick, yeah, I'd say, Nick, tell us what we're doing.
This is good, isn't it?
Lost, Nick. So
Friday, April 28th, whenever the team at
August 20th.
August. See, I told you it was like 1918 when we started this. August 28th. Whenever the teams at Binny's decide to get it on the shelves, it's available for sale there. And then we are going to coincide our release at the visitor center in DeKalb around 3:00 that same day. So
Nick, do you anticipate this being a yearly thing, by the way?
This is going to be more than a yearly thing. This is going to become our foundational product. So this release here was 7 barrels, 7 53-gallon barrels. We have the next iteration, we have over 50 to choose from.
Wow.
Moving forward from there, we'll call it the 2015 harvest. We'll have everything that we do. We have laid this plan out so that the foundation of what we do can be nothing but bottle and bond 4 to 5 year. We're going to get some stretch into 5 year plus, and this will be the staple of what we release.
Brett, Pat, any final thoughts before we wrap up too? What do you guys, anything else from Binny's we should know about?
Ooh.
Pat, what do we have coming up this weekend?
Well, we've got virtual tastings going on all the time, almost every Wednesday, except today when we're recording here. But this Friday, we've got Jackie Zykan, who's a master taster for Brown-Forman, specifically with the Old Forester brand, and also Rachel Berry, who is their blender for all their high-end single malts, things like Glen Gronick and Ben Riach. We're going to be talking to them about the different approaches of building bourbons versus Scotch whiskeys and putting those blends together. We got a lot of things with different masters distiller from various distilleries, both bourbon, rum, single malt scotch, etc. Binnies.com/virtual-events, and you can see all that stuff we're doing all through Zoom and Facebook Live. It's pretty fun.
Beautiful. Next Friday, Whiskey Acres Bottled and Bond. I did do a review on it on one of my Whiskey Wednesday reviews back in. It had to be probably March or April, I would guess. When Nick sent it to me, so you can.
I'll publish it here pretty soon this week. But this is what you're looking for.
There it is. It's a beautiful label.
Thank you. Just shout out to our friends at TDH Creative, Tom, Dick, and Harry Creative in Chicago. They put this label together for us, and
nicely
we love it. We love it. And what's cool is you'll see on here the tax stamp is 2014 harvest. Next iteration, you'll see a 2015 harvest. And
do you need to still put those tax stamps like the old days, or do you guys do that just for effect, just because it kind of looks cool?
It's a tax stamp, it's a tamper strip, and it's a marketing tool.
Perfect. All three. You check 3 boxes with that. I like it.